Morning, afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome back to the mid-morning session on dispute resolution in the airline industry and the potential for ODR and all it can do to make it fly. I'm going to let Colin Rule be the master of ceremonies, and I'm sure it will be an exciting panel. Over to you, Colin.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. I like what we can do to make it fly. That's good. I don't know how long you had to work on that, but that was great. Welcome, everyone. Very excited about this panel. This may be the panel that I have worked the longest on bringing to fruition because we originally had this idea back in 2000. So I'm delighted to be here, but we're going to kick it off with Gary. And Gary, your slides are up on the screen and we can hear you. So take us away.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Colin. Good morning, at least from Eastern Time Zone of the United States. Thanks for joining us. So my role in this presentation is, as you can tell from the first slide, is to set the stage. I have a long history in the airline industry as a lawyer and general counsel at the Trade Association, and eventually came to dispute resolution late in my career. I've been working in it for a few years now. And as you look at the airline industry and the potential for ODR to really help out, I see sort of three characteristics of the airline industry that I'm going to lead you through here. But just to give you the headline version, the three characteristics are going to be scale, just the sheer volumes of interactions with consumers, the complexity of the overall product and service offering, and then regulatory liability, which establishes a legal basis for disputes. So let me start out here and just give you some sense of the scale with some big numbers. So 4.5 billion passengers carried each year. I went back to 2019 because, of course, there was a dip in traffic because of COVID, but this is a scale we expect the industry to return to shortly. Out of that number, there are still 25 million bags mishandled each year out of the 4.3 billion suitcases and other bags that are handled. And this is despite actually a really impressive positive trend in decreasing the mishandled bag number. There are 3.9 million flights a year delayed by more than 30 minutes. That's 10,700 flights per day, affecting some 470 million passengers. And then, below the floor of that aircraft, there is 66.2 million tons of air freight moved every year. So what this means is that even in a low percentage of failure, you're still going to have a very high number, raw number of potential disputes. And there are going to be mistakes. It is a very complex industry. That picture is of the operations center at American Airlines that tries to choreograph where planes and flight crews and so forth are at any given moment. So it starts with, of course, a very complex product, the airplane itself. A lot of moving parts, a lot of things that go wrong. Now, I don't mean to trouble you about the safety of flying, because the fact is there are an enormous number of redundant safety systems in the critical components of an aircraft, meaning that it's, and as we all know, has an extraordinary safety record. But regulations require all of those systems to be operating. So even if it's a backup system, very often that would ground the airplane when that flaw is discovered. Then, of course, there are things inside the cabin, not just the cockpit, to worry about. There's all the in-flight entertainment, like and amenities like food service or the entertainment systems, Wi-Fi, power outlets. All of these become customer service issues, potential issues as well. Then Crew scheduling, again, the reason that sometimes the aircraft are delayed or our flights are canceled, particularly these days, is just a simple lack of qualified crew. And one of the things that's very difficult about the crew scheduling is it's this really wild choreography where you have to have the two people in the cockpit have to be trained on that particular aircraft. That training has to be current. Their medical exams have to be current. And then on the day of departure, there are regulations about how long have they been on duty? How long have they actually been in an aircraft that's operating? And there are mandatory non-waivable rest periods so that if things start to go wrong, it has kind of a snowball effect as crews, quote, time out because they've been on duty too long in a single day or in a single trip and can no longer legally operate the aircraft. So, and then in the cabin, you have the same story, second chapter. The flight attendants, which are required aboard aircraft, and there's a ratio of passengers to the number of flight attendants you have to have. They have to be trained on the aircraft. They have to be current in their certification on that aircraft and so forth. So all of these people have to come together before that aircraft can move. Then again, below the floor, you have baggage and cargo that has to be loaded and safely managed. And this is not a small thing in that baggage compartment or the cargo compartment. You may have compliance with hazardous cargo. You may have live animal handling. I mean, you may have all kinds of things going on below that floor, which require special care and are an opportunity for something to go wrong. Then, of course, we have the weather, as we all know, and how much it can impact the airline industry. And it's predictable to a degree, but not perfectly. And of course, weather in one place in a highly integrated system like an airline network can have an impact 1,000 miles away when the aircraft can't leave one place and be where it's supposed to be in the next. Air traffic control. This is literally an industry that cannot move its product, its aircraft, a single inch without government approval on each and every flight, and that's just on the ground. And then, of course, ticketing and fare rules, and this may be a little bit of self-imposed complexity because we all know ticket prices are highly dynamic and very and complicated in terms of the range of options, and they all come with sets of fare rules about how they can be used. So that adds another layer. And by the way, still about half of all of those tickets are being sold through a network of a global network of travel agents, adding the opportunity for error and more problems. So we have a complex environment. And then finally, layered on top of that, we have regulations, consumer protection. And I really should add, and good old-fashioned customer service. So each of these things have their own sets of regulations, which vary in various parts of the world, so that the airlines have to figure out how to comply, not with one set of rules or regulations, but with multiple. So ticketing issues and refunds are governed, in terms of, customer service or customer protections regulations in most jurisdictions. We have delayed or canceled flights, which actually give rise to fines or penalties. There is in the airline industry, the infamous Regulation 261 in Europe, which led the way into this, creating a structure of fines for delayed or canceled flights. There is, as I mentioned, the mishandled bags, which continues to plague the industry. There are all the potential for onboard service and amenity failures where the customer service call comes in that says, look, I had a very important business meeting on the other end of this flight. I anticipated the access to Wi-Fi to prepare for that. I didn't get it. I have a problem with that. And that's a problem, whether there's regulatory liability or not. It's a customer service problem that needs to be addressed. And then there are cargo mishaps. And I will just close my part of this by telling you about a story that was in the New York Times last weekend about farmers in Alaska shipping honeybees up to Alaska for use in pollination of their crops. And they were the original flight they were booked on. They're being shipped in their hives, in these containers, in the cargo hold. And the flight was canceled. Delta Airlines rerouted the bees via Atlanta. And in Atlanta, some of the bees got out, and the airline moved them out of the cargo hold and out onto the tarmac, where the temperature was too high for the bees, and many of them died. So there are some peculiar things that the airlines face on a very regular basis, all made more difficult by its scale and by its complexity. So that sets up the opportunity set, and I'll go back to Colin now to take it from here.
Gary, thank you so much. I think we can all acknowledge this is a potential gold mine of conflict. There's so many things that can go wrong. And just give me a minute to brag on Gary. Obviously, we're asking him to do this presentation with his prior hat as General Counsel of Orbitz, General Counsel of IATA. But he was too humble to mention, his ADR Notable platform is incredible. And I urge all of you, if you get a chance, look it up, adrnotable.com. It's a beautifully done platform. And he could do a whole hour just presenting on that, and it would be a great contribution. But Gary, we very much appreciate you framing up the discussion that we're having about airline cases. So why don't we go to Scott next? Scott, are you joining us from Israel? Are you there?
I am. Nice
Perfect.
to see everybody. Right. Yes, I flew here yesterday, actually, and happily.
Are there any bees on your flight?
No bees, no bees that I'm aware of. None were seen escaping, and happily, while some sort of a flight disruption might have offered me a great anecdote to kick things off, I'm happy to report that I at least had a seamless travel. But I will say, one of the reasons that these kinds of sessions do tend to attract a certain level of attention and interest is because they're not theoretical, right? We can all identify with challenges around air travel. As Gary said, the statistics show that the vast majority of flights do go smoothly and are uneventful. But when they don't, those are where we get the sharpest memories of our air travel and the stories that we tell to our friends and colleagues over years about the misroutings and the unexpected misconnections and the overnights and the lost bags. So, air travel challenges, the gold mine of potential conflict that Colin referred to, this is something which has been very much on the minds of politicians, of the public, and of regulators. And I'm going to speak today a little bit about the regulator's perspective. Now, I do so based on 6 years leading the Canadian Transportation Agency, which is Canada's national regulator for consumer protection and air travel, among other issues. I do want to just emphasize at the outset, I wound up that role about 11 months ago. I'm now a mediator and arbitrator in the private sector. So I don't speak for the Canadian Transportation Agency, but I am bringing the perspective of having run that organization for 6 years, during which there was a tremendous amount of activity around passenger protection. And I will say that, and I'm going to speak mostly about the CTA experience as kind of an illustration of some of the broader trends that we're talking about here. But I will say that the CTA experience is not unique. As Gary alluded to, regulators around the world have moved over the last decade or two to create quite robust and increasingly comprehensive passenger rights frameworks. And the upshot of those frameworks is that while travelers have more rights, they've got greater clarity on what their entitlements are when they travel, it also has resulted in a raising of the profile of these issues and much more recourse to dispute resolution processes by passengers than was the case in the past. So you sort of take the numbers that Gary presented about just the sheer number of people who are flying, the number of incidents, but then also keep in mind that as the rule sets have been strengthened and as their visibility has increased, the number of passengers, the proportion of passengers who are affected by some kind of an air travel issue, who are seeking recourse, is going up. So the percentage of those cases resulting in some sort of recourse activity is rising. So let me turn as an illustration to the CTA experience specifically. The CTA, the Canadian Transportation Agency, began working on a Canadian set of air passenger regulations, air passenger rights, back in 2016, 2017. We initiated some national consultations on the issue. We looked to EU 261 and other EU and American regulations, among others, for some inspiration, but consulted across Canada and looked for what made the most sense, drawing on global practice, but also taking into account Canadian realities, including, of course, the particular vulnerability of Canadian air travel to weather disruptions. The upshot was that we brought in a new air passenger protection regulation, which covers issues like flight disruptions, delays, cancellations, tarmac delays, lost and damaged baggage, and a host of other issues. So a similar set of issues to most global frameworks, drawing upon best practices abroad. So new framework in place actually just came into place completely in December 2019, just months before the pandemic hit. Why is this important? Well, partly it's important because it's an illustration of the trend towards more clearly defined, more binding passenger protection rules globally. But perhaps even more important is what the impact was on the number of passengers seeking recourse. So in 2015, before we started a kind of public conversation on these issues, about 800 people turned to the CTA with air travel complaints around a variety of issues during that year. In 2019, as the new regulations are brought online and following a significant level of public discussion around these issues, including our consultation process, media coverage, et cetera, the number of complaints was 19.5 thousand. So essentially a 25-fold increase in the number of complaints. That is a crucial number. It's probably, and Gary, you may have more information on this than I do, it's probably the most dramatic increase in complaint volumes that I'm aware of in any jurisdiction globally, but it's simply the most dramatic example of a general trend towards growing numbers as consumer awareness increases. What's also important to note is that it's a self-reinforcing process, this growth in numbers, because the more that people turn to recourse, the more they become aware of it, the more likely they are to turn to recourse again the next time, particularly if the process works for them, and the more likely they are to tell others about the availability of recourse mechanisms. So the likelihood, the most likely scenario is one where complaint volumes tend to continue to increase. This poses a fundamental challenge for regulators because, of course, the question is, how in heaven's name does a regulator who provides dispute resolution services cope with these kinds of numbers? At the CTA, we were able to secure temporary funding increases to hire a bunch of staff to process. And for a while, we were managing to bail, to use a Canadian metaphor, we were bailing water out of the canoe as quickly as the water was coming in. But by the time we hit 19,500 complaints, it was becoming harder to do that. So we started to get into a backlog scenario where it was just difficult to process complaints in a timely fashion. Now, what we did is we put tremendous emphasis on alternative dispute resolution. So like most regulators that have these kinds of functions globally, we emphasized informal facilitation, a couple of phone calls by one of our staff, see if they could just resolve things, followed when that didn't work by slightly more formal mediation efforts, more traditional mediation. And only if those two processes failed did a matter actually go for a formal adjudication. That actually has allowed the CTA to resolve 99% of complaints through facilitation, 95% through facilitation, and another 4% through mediation. So only 1% were ending up in adjudication, but even at that, it was very difficult and continues to be difficult for the organization to keep up. So this brings us to ODR and how might ODR contribute and how might some automation of the ODR process. So, and here I'm distinguishing as others have, at various points in the conference and in other sessions between ODR with a human being and automated ODR. And there can also be a hybrid that combines the two. Now, what's interesting is that of the 19,000 or so complaints that the CTA received, about a quarter of those were out of jurisdiction or not matters that really the organization could deal with. So right off the bat, 25% or so are resolved through a phone call or two. Another 40% dealt with flight disruptions and delays, where the rules are reasonably clear, and another 10% or so with baggage claims. So relatively relatively non-complex type files. So I would argue that there is tremendous scope for using ODR and using automation to try to deal with some of these issues. The more that we can create systems that digest data, that take in information on case types, on entitlements, and allow for parties to be at least given suggested resolutions, if not binding resolutions, through automated or semi-automated processes, the less need there is for human touch. And certainly if the case is out of jurisdiction, let's say it concerns the quality of food on a flight, for which there are no regulatory standards, unfortunately. For sure, if it concerns a lost bag, where the airline and the passenger aren't arguing about the circumstances, or a flight delay where there's no argument about the circumstances, there is very little rationale for human touch in those cases. And even in cases which may have greater complexity, it may be possible to use online and automated or semi-automated systems to clear away a bunch of information or a number of issues, to gather key baseline information, and so to minimize the human touch. Now, I will say as a final point that while I think online and automated or semi-automated solutions hold tremendous potential, they'll help regulators deal with volumes, they'll help airlines deal with volumes, and minimize customer frustration, and they'll help passengers get quick resolution. With all of that, it's important for these systems to have off-ramps or the possibility of human involvement, to the extent that an issue or a fact situation turns out to be more complex than was evident at the outset. We can't go to a level of automation which is so great that cases that actually require some interpretation and some judgment somehow get lost in the queue. But that to me is a caveat. I actually see no way for regulators and the industry to cope with what I think is going to be a continued trend towards large complaint volumes without some more significant adoption of online and automated and semi-automated solutions. With that, Gary, Colin, let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Scott. That was an excellent presentation. There's so many compelling ideas in there, but I think the one that captures my fancy the most is this idea of regulating the quality of food on airlines. I think we should expedite that proposal. Thank you. And it's humbling to have your expertise and Gary's expertise to set this frame. But let me invite up our good friend, Pablo. Yes, that's good. We love slides. Who is actually going to give us the dispute resolution service provider perspective, because he's actually been an adjudicator for many of these issues. So Pablo, let me.
Thank you. Yes, I am in the CEDAR panel for aviation disputes, and I have resolved nearly 600 airline complaints. I keep in count.
Are your slides in PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get you any minute now.
Okay.
Keep talking.
So sure. So just to give some context, well, I'm going to talk about the use of ODR for resolving aviation disputes in the UK, and in particular, the CEDAR system. To put things into context, the use of ODR for resolving aviation disputes in the UK took off when the ADR directive required the European member states, including the UK at the time, to certify ADR and ODR providers for all consumer disputes. And this was adopted on a sectorial level, and the regulator for aviation matters in the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority, certified 3 ODR providers, and one of them is CEDAR. But importantly and crucially, they say to the airlines to either join one of these, or we'll process the complaints ourselves and we'll charge you £150 per case. Now, the decisions made by CAA, by the regulator, are not binding on the airlines. But if the airlines sign up with an ODR provider, the decisions are binding on the airlines. But the ADR providers, the ODR providers can offer a service at a more competitive fee. And in fact, they do. Oh, yes. I think we're finding the slides. Great. Thank you very much.
Well done.
So I'm at the end of this first paragraph. Basically, the only requirement is ODR certified providers require airlines. The consumer complainants is first to make the complaint directly with the airlines, and the airlines have up to 8 weeks to decide whether to uphold the complaint. If not, then the passenger is able to escalate the complaint to one of the certified ADR providers, depending, well, if the airline is signed up with one of them, which, by the way, most airlines decided to sign up with one of the certified ADR providers. Most of the complaints we receive relate to delays and cancellations. So it is the regulation 261, but there are some issues also relating to reduced mobility complaints or lost luggage, as we heard earlier. So we apply the Montreal Convention. Issues about refunds, then we have to apply the terms and conditions and sometimes the Consumer Rights Act. But by and large, our decisions are adjudication based on, a substantive law, and we don't have a discretion on how to resolve these issues. We don't have much discretion, as we need to justify our decisions. Just to give you a sense how CEDAR operates, they charge £25 to passengers to make a complaint, and if any element of the complaint is upheld, then this fee is refunded to the passenger. I could say around 70% of the complaints approximately are upheld, at least partially. The airlines CEDAR charges £100 per case. This fee is not refundable unless parties settle before the case is, basically, unless the airline decides to settle before the case is allocated to an adjudicator. Decisions are adjudicated mostly by solicitors and barristers in the UK. And the decisions, what is quite common in the UK, also in the ombudsman models, are not binding on the passenger complainant, but will be binding on the airline if the passenger accepts the outcome, the decision. The passenger will accept it if it's obviously upheld, at least partially, the complaint. So the passenger is able to decide to go to the small claims court if they want to do so, but they would rarely do that because after all, they have already received an independent adjudication, so their chances of succeeding in court is in practice pretty slim. And when the outcome, the adjudication is accepted by the passenger, then the airline has to comply with the outcome within 20 days. On average, cases are decided within 39 days. And this is the platform that Colin developed because CEDAR is using the Modria platform. So just to give you a short snap about the function. So it is an online platform that actually CEDAR uses for both airline disputes and telecommunication disputes. It is a username and password to access, allows you to upload and download documents, to submit the complaint, the defense, the evidence, decisions. And then every time any information is posted on the platform and the parties receive a notification. Also the neutrals, adjudicators will receive notifications when cases are allocated to us. It also offers a chat function where the parties can negotiate a settlement, although in practice rarely settle. And the adjudicators, sometimes we may use the chat function to request additional information before we make our decision. Usually we have 2 weeks to make a decision. And also has a very helpful function that allows you to order the cases, because obviously I get around 2 to 3 cases a week. I used to have more, and so it's very important to be able to identify the cases that need to be resolved by the deadlines. So the search functions to identify cases and also to tie them up by the deadlines are very helpful. Just to finish up with some issues, as Scott mentioned earlier, there is clearly some scope for AI to be used for airline disputes, at least to filter some cases and to narrow issues, and put here examples of, for instance, cancellations made with more than 2 weeks in advance of the flight. In those cases, passengers are not entitled to compensation, or when the delays are under 3 hours, or cancellations are beyond the control of the airlines. In terms of consistency in decision making, this can be a bit challenging. We don't follow a precedent system, but adjudicators are able to exchange views in what we use Basecamp. And when there are novel issues, we discuss them in this platform. Also, the adjudicators receive some training before they start resolving cases by looking at cases that had already been resolved and being evaluated. And also we have a peer review system where some cases are reviewed on a regular basis. And another issue that we have noticed in the last couple of years is that the risk of forum shopping, as it happened, you may have heard before about domain names, because the airlines choose and pay for the ODR provider. So they will choose the ODR provider that is the most, the cheapest, or the most likely to decide in their favor. This is what which is a UK consumer organization said in last year in an article that noticed that EasyJet that had signed up with Cedar moved to the other ADR provider, aviation ADR, and was deciding more cases in favor of the airline that Cedar was. So there is this risk that needs to be monitored, and this is the role that the regulator has. And there is quite a hefty fee that the regulator requires the ODR providers. Currently, the fee is over £5,000 just to be certified, and then an annual oversight fee of over £13,000, which also limits the entry level of new ODR providers. So this is some of the issues that I wanted to share with you. And obviously, if you have any questions or comments, we can discuss them later.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to do all the comments at
Sure.
the end, but please, a round of applause. And with no further ado, let me introduce my good friend, Ed.
Yes. So Colin said he wanted a visual aid for this event. So I am that visual aid. You're welcome. Yes, Eddie Folsom, captain for a major airline. My interaction came from a course I took with Colin. I'm very new to this field, just a handful of years through Pepperdine, and very excited when I took this course. And so he gave me the opportunity to speak with you all. I jumped at the idea, and plus I heard they have pretty good Guinness here. So full disclaimer right off the bat. Yes, I work for a major airline. No, I'm not representing them here. These are my thoughts and my experiences over the last 30-something years working in the industry with a lot of different carriers. So I have a perspective. You've heard now 3 or 4 different points of view. So now we're going to move, and as we look at this object, ODR and aviation, now we're going to go and we're going to talk to a frontline employee, frontline leader, captain of an airplane, and see how I see the problems and where I see the opportunities for ODR. So my professional life's been about advocacy, security, then safety, and then coming into dispute resolution and coming to the place that really at the end of the day, how do we better serve our customers? So how do we provide them the safest and most comfortable flight experience? So this is my role as a captain. I have a tremendous amount of authority to impact that operation for that day, that flight, that day, that airport, where we're going. With that comes of course a lot of accountability too, because if I screw it up, I'm going to be held accountable for that. But it's a very, very dynamic environment. I think Gary and Scott spoke to that already. There's weather issues, there's maintenance issues, there's stuff going on below the wing, there's loading cargo, there's customer service issues. When I get on that airplane and we're, with my crew and we're setting the airplane up and we're checking the maintenance and everything, then I'm also inheriting my customers. Now they've had quite an experience just to get to that point, right? When they get to the jetway, when they have the customer service agent, and it may have been a very challenging experience just to get there. They might have forgot their toothbrush at home and that pissed them off, and then they're going through TSA and they had to do secondary screening and that irritated them, and then our flight's delayed maybe because there's a weather issue or maintenance issue. So by the time they get to me, sometimes they're a little frazzled. So they're dealing with stress, they're dealing with that anxiety, frustration, disappointment to some extent, and then I get them. And so me and my team, what our objective is to try to make this, first of all, safe. Second of all, that we're going to demonstrate caring and empathy, and we're going to hopefully build up their confidence that whatever we have to get through, the weather or the maintenance issues or whatever, that we're going to get through that together and we're going to get them safely on the ground. So some of the things that I and my crew are trying to achieve when we're interacting, I'm going to give you on a personal one-on-one basis, and then let's see how ODR might actually help that happen. So obviously I'm trying to be sensitive, demonstrate that I'm aware of their circumstances. If depending on what the situation, I might actually go out to the boarding area and make a PA announcement so that they can look at me face to face, so I can explain to them the maintenance delay or whatever it is that we have. And then when we get on the airplane, engaging with the passengers, trying to demonstrate that, yeah, we've got our act together. We're going to get through whatever the stressors are and get you off and get you to your location. We're trying to build, for some people, they get there, it's hilarious. Some passengers, as high functioning as they are, and now they're out of control, and they're actually feeling a little bit anxious about, does this guy know what he's doing? So we're just reinforcing the fact that whether it's a maintenance issue or whatever, we know what we're doing and everything's going to be fine. How does ODR potentially fix this thing? So because it's such a complex environment, because there's so many moving pieces, and because things inevitably are going to go wrong, how can ODR help us? It would be nice if every single passenger had somebody that could walk them by the hand all the way through this process from the time they're going through security or whatever, but they're not. And so what I see ODR doing is, in a virtual way, trying to do what I'm trying to do once I get them, to demonstrate, have good communication, let them know proactively what's going on. If there's a delay or whatever, through IT, through technology, letting them know about that. If there's a problem, if a bag is lost, tell them up front that that's there, that it's on the next flight, whatever, so that they don't get spun up to the point where they're just, out of, very, very frustrated. Demonstrating empathy, compassion. So when we're having a delay or whatever, they want to see us face to face. They want us to know, they want to tell their story. They want to vent. Maybe that's all they need. They don't need any more than just to communicate. Well, when I'm there, that's what I try to do. But what I see ODR doing is being a replacement for that. It's not as good as a human being doing that face to face, but I think that's a really key thing. If we can have a forum and an ability for this platform, this ODR platform, to provide an opportunity for that customer to simply tell their story. Maybe it's a good story, maybe it's a bad story, but to vent, and then through asynchronous communication or however we want to do it, communicating back to them, yes, we're really sorry that this happened. We're really, we understand, and we're gonna fix that. Sometimes it's preventing the problem. before it even becomes a big issue. So if there's something happening, we can communicate them through an ODR platform that, hey, there might be a better flight through a different city because we have a storm over Newark, but if we go through Chicago and we can solve that, we can create a very positive environment using the technology. Let's see what else. Basically just building up trust and confidence and hopefully loyalty in our product. A couple of things I see that are challenges with the interactions. Colin and I are working with my carrier to introduce this idea to them. No other carriers are doing this. And so this is a real opportunity. There's a perception in my mind from the customer's point of view that there's a very high threshold for a customer before they can file a complaint or have a complaint dealt with. And then on the other side, the company is very sensitive to the fact that there's a whole lot of complaints. There's a whole lot of complaints they have to deal with, and they're doing it in a pre-IT kind of environment. They're not utilizing technology like they could. So they're up, so I think, what was it? It might've been, was it Gary, I think, that mentioned, or no, Scott mentioned that there's so many complaints and they're getting worse and worse. Well, when we do ODR, when we lower that threshold, arguably there's going to be even more complaints. So that's going to be a challenge, and how we frame that with the carrier, that those problems were already there. It's just that you were either ignoring it, you didn't want to hear it, whatever. And if really we want to collect that data from my perspective. And so, yes, that means there's going to be more complaints, but the ODR will help process, like Pablo and Scott said, they're going to process the 99 out of 100 of those, or 999 out of 100, so that we can focus on the big issues. So that's going to be a challenge for us to try to work that out with the carriers. I think because of that high barriers to reporting something, there's a structural, unintended, but a structural lack of empathy or compassion to the customer. They just feel like they're being ignored. They're not being heard. So that's something that hopefully the ODR can fix. If the perspective from the carrier is that, hey, this is just business. We got a lot of cycles up and down. We need to make this happen. But for that passenger, and this is what somehow we've got to solve this through the ODR, and through not just that, but we need to make sure they understand that we hear you. We understand that this was a big event for you. So and we're suggesting that we're going to use online or something other than a live person to do that. So ODR is not going to replace the need for people. It's supplementing it for the binary types of problems that it'd be nice if they knew the problem is solved by the time they're first notified, and in 15 minutes we can have a solution, have $150 Zelle to them while they're at the airport because they don't have their bag, and it becomes a nothing burger. That's great, but it doesn't replace the need for people. And so while I think ODR is very, very important part of the solution set, I think the biggest thing is that the carriers are going to have to own up with their commitment and their desire to want to serve their customers. And it's going to require a change of culture. So frontline employees like myself, we're going to have to be willing to kind of step out of our safe place and go and lean into the problems that we're experiencing. Same with our flight attendants, whatnot. And so if the carriers are willing to do that, to demonstrate what they say their values are with a commitment to do what we're suggesting, then I think ODR can be a very, very powerful tool to make things better for us. So I'll hand it to Colin now, and he'll show you the platform that he's put together that I think is going to make the world a better place.
Well, that we've put together. Yeah. We've put together. Thank you so much, Ed. Well, this whole conference has been on time, and I don't want to be the one at the finish line to blow that deadline. So let me dive right in here. I've learned so much from Ed over the time that we've been working together. So let me just share some of the things that we've been jointly collaborating on. But I am going to use this as an excuse. Claire and I are very, very excited to announce the launch of our first public launch of ODR.com, which is our new platform. Chitu unfortunately couldn't be here. We've been working on this for 2 years. Actually, what I'm going to show you today is a demo of a prototype that Ed and I have built on ODR.com for dealing with airline disputes. But please check out the website. Let me know if you see any bugs. And we would love to give you a demo of the full suite when we get a chance. Let me move a little Zoom thing here so that I can, nope, I'm not going to click stop share. There we go. We got it. One thing I know how to do is move the Zoom toolbar. So this is just an example. So this is not actually a United website. I have stolen a picture of, so let me just be clear. This is just a prototype. But Ed and I have had lots of conversations with folks at United, and one of the case volumes that we've targeted is baggage cases. So the flow I'm going to show you now is intended specifically for cases where your bags have been lost and you've encountered some expenses that you want to get reimbursed for because you had to pay for things. So essentially, one of the things we do with this prototype is it's integrated directly, you can just plug it right into any website. And then we try to have language that's really friendly and engaging. Welcome to the Resolution Center. If you've incurred some expenses while your bag was lost or delayed, you're in the right place. Let's get you reimbursed. So the way it works is you have to have a file reference number, which is given when you go to the baggage office and they give you a number, so you can put in that number. And then we authenticate. We need to get your name, so we know that you're actually the right person for that claim. Let's see, Ed Folsom. And then we say, okay, this is what we have for you in our system. Is this correct? Yep, it's Ed. And then we say, has you or anyone in your household already filed a complaint regarding this case with United or any other airline? So if the answer is yes, then you can't proceed. So then we say, okay, give us a receipt that for something you've experienced. You can upload it if it's on mobile. Oh yeah, there we go. If it's on mobile, you could just do it on your phone. And then we say, okay, how much is this for? So say it's $37. And we say, okay, do you want to upload another receipt? We say, yeah, you can upload a second receipt. How much is this receipt for? $22. So it tells you how much you've requested so far. It shows you the links of the files you've uploaded. So it calculates your total. And we say, we don't have another receipt to submit. And then they want to get a photo of your driver's license or an ID so that they know that this is really you. So you can upload that. And then we say, well, how would you like to receive your reimbursements? We have logic in the platform that says this is the first time that one of these customers has filed a complaint. And if it's less than a certain threshold, like $100, you get an automatic reimbursement. So we say, I'd like to get it via PayPal. This is my real PayPal email if anybody wants to send me a tip, because this presentation is so great. Well, there's no validation on it, so that's not going to work. Oh, there is validation on it. So it's this Irish keyboard is monkeying with me. Any other details? Nope. That looks good. And then we say, thank you very much. We just sent you $59 via PayPal. Let us know if you need more help, and thanks for flying United. So the beauty of the system, again, you don't have to authenticate because you have your baggage claim number. You go right back to the United website. But what we have is actually on the back end, a very powerful case management system that all of this information is flowing into. So these cases come into case management, and you can click and you can see all of the data that was shared in this individual case. So this is completely configurable in terms of the information that's gathered in that intake process. And you can see whatever documents they've uploaded. We also have the ability within the platform, you can see if there's a follow-up call that's required. We have a calendar that's integrated, and it tracks all of the activity on the case. And the beauty of the system, the real reason why this is interesting from a case management perspective, is we've also integrated in online collaborative workspaces. So some of you may recognize this as the CREC platform. We're merging the caseload manager platform with the CREC platform, so we can automatically open up a collaborative workspace and invite the customer into that workspace so they can continue to discuss if they weren't able to get an instant resolution, say they were above the $100 threshold. And the beauty of this is also it's connected in real time to, we use Amazon QuickSight, which is a business intelligence platform that has dynamically generated metrics indicating how much money is being paid out, how long are these cases taking, because the airlines are very concerned that they may have exposure. If buyers are coming in and abusing the system and they figured out, hey, I'm going to get all my money back, that's less than $100, you might get a rash of these things. So all of this data is being gathered in real time. So we think that this kind of approach could be pretty revolutionary in the airlines for dealing with the kinds of cases we've discussed. Ed, did I leave anything out in terms of the conversations we had with United folks about a tool like this? I know you're looking also at cases involving people with differently abled individuals, right? Do you want to talk about that for a minute, and then we'll take some questions?
Right. So this was a pilot project because they just wanted something very, very narrow. There's all sorts of, I guess I'm just going to tell it, there's kind of a bad story and it's upsetting, and we're going to try to get that fixed, and there's paths to it. that involve ODR and other solution sets as well. But we have a woman who is a disabled in an electronic wheelchair, and it happened last summer, and she was coming back to San Francisco, and the people down below destroyed her wheelchair, and ended up being a $30,000 fix, kind of a big oops, right? But in the meantime, she got a loaner chair. Well, the loaner chair was not ideal for her. In fact, she got sores, she got infection, it got under her bones, and in October, she passed away. Very, very negative story, and all over the news. Around that same time, there was another woman who is she's Olympic team, paraplegic Olympic team person, and also an advocate in her own right for another organization. And she was flying from somewhere to somewhere, and guess what? We broke her wheelchair. And this was in October, around the same time as the first woman who passed away. I've caught wind of this a couple of weeks ago on a LinkedIn page feed, and I reached out to her in a private message, and I said, "Can I do something?" Because she was very upset, and she was, for the last 6 months she's been strung out, and thankfully she didn't have the complications that this first person. So that process for both those folks was very, very long, and so how does that apply to ODR? What can we do about it? Well, it doesn't need to be a 6-month process, but we do have some other things, some other problems. Like, for example, some previous speakers were talking about, we have DOT reportables. We have Americans with Disability Acts requirements, so that if something fits into that thing, and we can become, as an industry, we become a slave to these regulatory constraints, which really make things very long and drawn out, which doesn't serve the interest of our customers. So how do we solve that problem? ODR, the companies using ODR can help with that. I believe we can. But yeah, I mean, that's a perfect story for, there was a lot of things that needed to happen, but I think part of that would have been if we would have been able to communicate very quickly to, let's say, Karen, so that she wouldn't have gotten so upset, so that now 6 months later, she's ready to go to the New York Times and she's posting things on social media stuff. We don't need that. So
and to surface the issue more quickly internally as well. So
right.
All right, great. I know we're at time, but maybe we could just do a couple questions. If we could pass the mic around. Does anybody have any comments, thoughts, reactions?
Yeah.
Graham,
Thank you, Colin. So there I was on the flight with my laptop safely in my case, ready to fly somewhere very nice and give a presentation and also do a bit of work. Very boring. But my case wasn't there. What we were just looking at was just asking for receipts. So presumably there will be another button somewhere for the payment of compensation for. I might have had to have not enjoy this wonderful city that I've come to because I've got to recreate the presentation, and it's given me a lot of anxiety and taking a little.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, again, it's not like there's only going to be one flow. Oh, I should be at the mic. There's not going to be one ODR flow to deal with one narrow case type. I think what we're saying is there needs to be a wide variety, and each has to fit the form to the fuss. Obviously, Ed's talking about this situation, it's tragic situation with this woman. There's not that many of those cases, but they're very, very significant and important. And we need to make sure we build an appropriate flow that addresses that severity. If I have to buy lunch because, I'm stuck in an airport and I can't leave while I'm waiting for my bag, that's an automated flow. So I think we need to build many, many solutions for the different kinds of problems that people encounter. Ed, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the person on the team that I spoke to back channel to find out from her perspective, the United person, she's a very caring person, but I think because the structure, the way it's set up with its live people, there's big load case, it takes time, the way that they're communicating back and forth. And it creates a structural, I don't know what the technical phrase is, kind of a structural lack of empathy. It's built into the system where the person on the other side, on the company side, is trying to fix this. They have lots of empathy and compassion, but the way from the perspective of the customer, it sucks. And that's what we can fix. We can't fix everything. Those two situations I said, there's obviously going to be people involved, right? But at the very front end, right from the get-go, very quickly, we can communicate empathy and compassion. We're going to get on this and communication transparency, because that's what my customers want to hear. When things are going sideways, they just want to hear that the captain's got this. And what's the truth? Don't lie to me, right?
Yeah.
So,
Or to pull out your app and push a button and you have a resolution right there. Gary and Scott, do you have comments about that you'd like to share?
Maybe I'll
The
just
only
jump in.
comment-
Oh, go ahead, Gary.
Well, I was going to actually cite you, Scott, at some point. I was very taken by the fact that you said about 40% of the complaints that came in could be, your team could look at them and say, that's outside the scope of our jurisdiction, or that's not something we can resolve. So, and I think Pablo, his first call to action on his slide as well was to use some artificial intelligence to screen these matters in the first instance. I mean, you could have, if your 40% is representative, that is a huge leap forward right there, right? I mean, where you get 40% of these out of the system because they just needed some education or they just needed some information, and it was dismissed essentially. So I mean, I think that is one of the biggest takeaways I saw from what was presented today.
So two things. First of all, I may have misspoken. It's actually 25% to 30 that were in that category, but it's still a huge number.
Yeah.
And then, okay, and 3% of the remainder were delays and cancellations, but that's an aside. It's still a huge number. So yes, I completely agree, Gary. And I think the other thing that I would say in response to the question is, like, I think each of these ODR solutions is going to have to be tailored to the relevant regulatory framework, right? Like, what are the rules the airline is obligated to follow, the airline's own terms and conditions, and then also the airline's policy choices, right? Like in a case like the one that the questioner was mentioning, and as I said, we all have these various personal experiences. Some airlines might say, we're going to take you at your word about, without any kind of further substantiation. And others may seek substantiation. And there's a little bit of a choice that the airline may be making, depending on what the regulations say and the terms and conditions around how they want to deal with these issues. And some of the analytics that the systems can provide, which Colin was talking about, may help the airline make that decision. They may choose a more rigid or a more flexible policy initially and tweak as they go, depending on what they see around complaints.
Yeah, and I want to go to Pablo to get his thoughts too. I would say one of the benefits of automation is resolving the low-hanging fruit cases, so your human resources can devote their attention to the cases that most require it.
Exactly.
And people say, well, automation is dehumanizing. It's going to eliminate the human touch that Ed talks about as being so essential. But no, I disagree. I think automation helps us preserve our human resources for those cases that most. I think a lot of airlines, they have a hard time picking out the really severe case from the just torrent of cases that are coming in every day. And I think automation can help them with that triage, exactly as Gary noted, that sort of AI lens that can help them find the case where they need to go and get involved early so it doesn't go for 6 months.
Yeah.
And let's give Pablo the mic.
I'm not sure how I really frame this right, but what the perfect thing is, I'm with that person from the moment they step on the airport. I take them through all the security. I get them on the airplane. I give them a fabulous flight experience, and then I escort them to their car on the other side. But I can't do that, and we can't. And no airline can have even hand off a number of people to do that.
But if anyone does want that, and you're on an Ed flight, I think he will be willing.
I do. I help ladies off the plane all the time. But so this online thing is to the extent that you couldn't do that if you wanted to on a human level. So let's do something close to that meets that need, that felt need.
Right.
So they can be heard, so that honest communication is happening to them. So they feel like somebody, even though it's somebody on the other side of a asynchronous, texting, is demonstrating compassion and empathy. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say. And the ODR does that, but it doesn't replace the human. But in the situations where we could never do that humanly in a timely way, let's do it through ODR.
I think make it more human with the word, not the standard proceed button. Very much you, Colin. Let's get reimbursed.
Yeah, exactly. Talk to them the way the person would talk to them. That's right. Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Colin, and all others. It is an excellent panel, and so good luck So that's important.
Great, next question.
And well, okay, so what is my question? Do you think, well, I think that you have done it, but I think important thing for you will be how to integrate with the systems of the of your customers,
That's
of
right.
the airplane company. So that's
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing that I think Chitu and I have felt over building all of these processes. You've got to integrate as deeply as you can. You've got to have full documented APIs. You have to have, SDKs so that they can make it a seamless handoff from their interface. It also can't feel like they have to leave United to go to someplace else to resolve the problem. And that's why it needs to be completely, and that level of integration is technically complicated. Right. I mean, we've seen if you build a great ODR service that's going to provide white gloves, but it requires someone to go to another URL in order to click a button to start that process, 90% of the customers aren't going to do that. It's not a delight experience for them. So again, this has to be human-centered. We have to think exactly as Ed said, what is the fastest way we can deliver that resolution to them and say, wow, somebody really thought about this and sanded the corners off of this process. So technically, that's not simple. And the expectations, especially the information security expectations of these kinds of large companies, because they have a lot of responsibilities protecting that data, we have to do a lot to be able to meet them where they are. So Alan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, Ed, Scott, and Gary. Great presentation. You talked about empathy, and something I've been reflecting on during your talk. I took a train in the UK the other day, and it was 76 minutes delayed. I know that it stopped outside a station en route, 76 minutes delayed. I know it was 76 minutes delayed because by the time I arrived at my destination, I got an email from the train company to say the train was delayed 76 minutes. You're entitled to a full refund. Click the button to claim your full refund.
Wow.
Now there's a bit of friction in that. I had to get, copy and paste various numbers from different apps, but that for me was, somebody thought about the user experience, and
are you more likely to use that train
Indeed,
company?
yeah.
So that's a great story. Scott, Gary, do you have any comments about that or anything else we've been bouncing around since we last went to you?
The only one quick other observation is that given, my comments about the scale and the volume of these things, that plays well into an artificial intelligence environment, right? When you have a large number of incidents that can be grouped as essentially similar and then train the AI well. I mean, this is a perfect example of where big data and AI techniques can be very accurate and very efficient.
Absolutely. Scott, how about you?
Yeah, I think just picking up on that, I'm coming back a little bit to Colin, yours and Ed's kind of conversations about empathy and human touch. I actually think that kind of an automated, quick resolution is tremendously appealing to many travelers. And, if that can be built into systems, I don't think that for the straightforward stuff, my flight was delayed, I'm owed a certain amount of money, my bag was lost for 3 days, here are my receipts. I actually think that most people will appreciate the efficiency of an automated system, and will not hold it against the airline that they didn't speak to a human being. I think that where the human aspect becomes crucial is for more complex or drawn out cases. So I actually think that that's a really good example of what an automated system can do. And I think it will actually result in better consumer satisfaction.
Well, it's like we say in the courts, if we can realize all of the efficiency on the civil side and save that money, let's put it all into the criminal side. And I think that we could do in airlines too. Let's save as much as we can, and then let's take the savings and let's put it into light experiences for, like Ed said, with these really, much more human impacting scenarios. So I'm cognizant of the fact that we're over here. Pablo, do you want to make a final comment? Can we give Pablo the mic?
Well, I could make this a very brief comment. Just to say that it is fine that airlines treat customers right and they are efficient ODR systems to deal with their complaints, but sometimes the complaints need to escalate outside the airlines.
That's right.
The passenger is not happy with the decision made by the airline. And the airlines, after they have made their decision, they will not want to pay an ODR provider to review their own decision unless they are sort of forced or incentivized to do so.
Right.
And that's why I work in the UK, that's why I work in Germany with legislation that forced the airlines to sign up with independent ODR providers. that they can review these, complaints. I'm sorry, I was conscious that you asked. No?
I was simply going to say, I think that, Ed, what I heard you saying, and Scott, you sort of stole my thunder because I agree with you. There's a way to, there are two categories here, right? Speed to resolution delights the customer because I have a low value claim or issue and I just want speed to resolution. But I think, Ed, what you're talking about is soft to resolution, which is I need my expectations managed about the process I'm about to enter into, right? And so if somebody can tell me the map in front of me that I won't feel lost along the way, if someone just says, look, this is what you're about to go through. It's this gate, this gate, this gate. This is what's going to happen. And, we just want to make you aware of the process. So as you're going through it, you don't feel lost or you don't feel underinformed. With that level of empowerment, someone can enter the process feeling less disenfranchised. And I think that gets to your feeling of empathy. And Scott, your point is well made about speed to resolution is sometimes all I need. Click, 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 I'm done.
Right. Well, I think I remember Yin Ho talked a lot about the justice journey. And if you can take someone's hand and lead them through that journey, then that's a delight experience. I mean,
Ultimate empathy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And Pablo and I have had a rich conversation for 20 years about should ODR live within the private companies or should ODR live within external dispute resolution organizations or public entities? And I think the answer to that debate is yes, it should be both places. Everybody I've met at United, their heart's in the right place, all the way up to the CEO. I think Kirby is talking about, we want to delight our customers. That's the number one brand message we want to communicate. But that said, there are cases where I think you need to have outside organizations that can provide that additional layer of trust and review. So again, I'm cognizant that we're over. I'm enjoying this conversation, but I think maybe we'll leave it there. So thank you to my co-panelists. Thank you to Ed. Thank you to Pablo, Scott, Gary.